Esteemed guests, welcome to the Oxford Smart Space Speaker Series, brought to you by the Oxford Space Initiative at Said Business School. My name is Michele Scattaglini. I'm Associate Fellow at the Said Business School, University of Oxford, and co-convener of the Oxford Space Initiative. Oxford Space Initiative is the Said Business School research initiative on the global space sector. We focus on the intersection between emerging technologies and societal revolutions. The initiative is led by Professor Mark Ventresca and Dr. Luca Schello. The Smart Space Speaker Series is brought to you by Oxford Space Initiative and Wolfson College. In today's episode, entitled Pathways to Space, we feature conversations about how incumbent firms, government agencies, ventures, and others imagine space as an opportunity for business and how they organize their strategies. I'm honored to introduce to you three distinguished speakers today. Dr. Saud Humaid Al-Shuaili, Director General Policies and Governance, Head of the National Space Program at the Ministry of Transport, Communications and Information Technologies of the Sultanate of Oman, dialing in from Muscat tonight. Dr. Saud is a renowned international executive leader with a professional experience of over 21 years in the ICT sectors. He is a professional management consultant and advisor to the Ministry of the ICT, Post and Space fields. His professional experience includes sector legislation and regulations, policy, strategic planning and execution, governance and compliance. He represents the sector at various regional and international events. Dr. Saud has led various legislative, policy, and strategic initiatives that have impacted the sectors including ICT law, personal data law, national ICT strategy, national cloud first policy, post-sector policy and executive strategy, national space policy and executive strategy, beside others. He has been invited as guest of honor and keynote speaker in various forums. Dr. Saud is a board member in various local and international board of directors, including UPU, ArabSatCo, ITHCA ICT Holding, and UN Regional Center for the Space Science and Technology Education. He is also the country representative in the ITU. Dr. Saud holds a PhD in public policies for science, technology, and innovation, besides his master in engineering in electrical and computer engineering. He's graduate, among others, of the first cohort of the National Leadership and Competitiveness Program by the Divan Royal Court and University of Oxford. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
Yasreen Ibn Yahya is Senior Director in Advanced Concepts and Technology at Viasat. Yasreen is an engineering professional with 18 years in the space industry, specializing in innovation, communication systems, and advanced entrepreneurship. She currently leads the Advanced Concepts and Technology Department at Viasat Global Space Network Division, where she has created and led several innovative satellite communication products and missions. She's also responsible for building large public-private partnerships with space agencies worldwide. Her academic accolades include an executive MBA from the University of Cambridge, UK, and 2 Masters of Science degrees in the UK and France. As an ambassador for diversity, equity, and inclusion, Yasreen founded the Inmarsat Women's Network and is regular advocate for STEM education. Thank you for being with us, Yasreen.
Thank you.
And last but not least, dialing in from Colorado this morning, Mani Shah, the Chief Strategy Officer of OrbitFab. OrbitFab is a pioneering space startup focused on the development of an in-space propellant and material supply chain. Mani founded OrbitFab's first international office in the UK and is focused on technology development, commercialization, and international growth. He previously developed Brightech's international presence into a revenue-generating and profitable business, managed the analysis of multi-billion-dollar portfolio of assets at Inmarsat, and executed a cross-functional initiative at top-tier investment banks. Mani sits in multiple advisory boards and committees, including for the UK Space Agency and the International Astronautical Federation. He is recipient of the 2023 IAF Young Space Leader Award, the 2029 and 2020 SSPI 20 Under 35 Award, the Space Generation Leadership Award from the SGACs, and the Williams Ball Award for Entrepreneurship. Mani holds a master's degree in space studies from the International Space University and a bachelor's in computer science from the University of Kent. Thank you for being with us, Mani. So now we are ready for the discussion with our distinguished speakers. After the discussion, we will have 10 minutes from Q&A. So for the guests connecting from online, please put your questions in the chat on the various social media, and we'll put them back to our speakers at the end of the session. So let's get started. My first question is for Dr. Saud. So what does space mean as a commercial opportunity for your organization?
Thank you very much, Michael. And let me just introduce that I'm not representing a private institution. I'm representing the Ministry of Transport, which is one of the Transport and ICT, which is one of the government bodies, and it is solely in charge of developing the space sector. Prior to 2020, the space sector in Oman was not recognized as a standalone sector. So while the country benefiting from various space-based services, the sector itself was not perceived as a commercial player. By 2020, when the new government was formed, the establishment of the National Space Center within the Ministry of Transport and ICT was established there to look after the development of space sector as an economic player among other sectors. Okay, so we started from there. And the first thing we did at the Space Center, of course, which is the National Space Program that I'm heading, is to define the way forward, how these sectors can contribute to the socio-economic benefits and basically into economic diversifications. I think most of the audience realize that this region in the world enjoy the revenue of oil and gas, and all these countries making or taking great efforts, great initiatives in diversifying the economy by focusing on different economic sectors. In Oman, one of which, not in Oman, across the region, they perceive the space sectors as a commercial player that will enable the socio-economic development, and it will enable not only the development of the sector, but the other sectors of the economy, including, for example, the logistics sectors that play a key role in the country, including the fisheries sector, including the water resources, agriculture sectors. So we started taking various initiatives by developing these sectors in a way that we can localize some of the services that we are receiving nowadays from outside and localize it in the country. So we strongly believe that this sector will be in a position to contribute to socio-economic development. In order to continue tracking the development and the contribution of the sector, we started by doing an economic analysis of the current situation of these sectors, how much it's worth, what is the market value of the sector in the country, how much it's worth, basically, if we would like to commercialize it to a private buyer, how much it's worth, what can we do, how it will contribute in the coming futures, in the coming 7 to 10 years. And we estimated everything, how much the supply and demands, who are the key players, the local, the regional, the global players, what they are doing, and with a proper strategic planning, how can we enhance the strength of the sector currently and to improve the weakness that is going on in the country and to make use of the opportunities on the way. So the bottom line is that we strongly believe this sector will contribute significantly to the socio-economic development, specifically to the economic diversifications. And we concluded that through various economic analysis while we were developing the national space policy.
Extremely insightful as a government, sovereign country looking at space as an opportunity for socio-economic impact. And now let's move to Yasreen and your views and your organizational views on space as a venture.
So in general, space is divided into, let's say, three main pillars. You have the position, navigation, and timing, which is basically GPS or equivalent services. You have the Earth observation that is often used to monitor how, I don't know, fields like agriculture, etc., and assess that. And the sector I work on is the telecommunication one. And this is perhaps one of the most lucrative sector out of the three, according to the various research. And what we see today is, in general, the space sector is representing about $700 billion revenue today, with a growth of 9% year on year, and an expectation that by 2035 or so, this sector will be worth $1.8 trillion. So a very exciting growth happening in the sector at the moment. Well, as Viasat, so Viasat is a satellite operator. We're focusing on providing connectivity to the residential market, so directly to your home, but also to the mobility market. So for us, the commercial opportunity is about anything that is on the move, whether you are in the air, so the aviation market, and even when you divide, we look at 5 sectors: residential, aviation, maritime, enterprise, and government. And for each one of them, things have evolved quite a lot from the original days. So originally, we were serving, let's say, the maritime and aviation with a small amount of throughput and focusing also on safety services. And things have evolved as the market has evolved. So if I take aviation, we've moved to passenger connectivity. So now every time you get on a plane, you have access to internet. It's probably on a Viasat network or equivalent operators. And the cockpit is probably communicating using also one of our system, especially when you do transoceanic flights from, let's say, London to New York. In the middle of the ocean, you have no other ways for the cockpit to communicate than using satellites. So those are very important services. And then even within the aviation market, we see evolution. We see more and more demand for the air mobility around drones, for example. If we fast forward in the future and we're going to have flying taxis, those systems will need to have satellite communication when they are in the air, and resilience and reliability. So multiple satellite systems will probably be serving those markets. And if I look on our roads as well, our cars in the future will probably have as well an eCall service, where in case of accidents, automatically using satellite connectivity outside of terrestrial coverage. So you get rescued, a diagnosis is sent, a voice call session is set up between the driver and some sort of center that is supporting this. So we can see a huge evolution of this market. And last but not least, there's also space as a new market, and perhaps it's a nice segue for many, is that space itself is becoming a new place where we see big commercial opportunities. And with the growing demand for Earth observation satellites that you need to task in real time, launch vehicles that need to send their telemetry or video live, IS, International Space Stations that are turning into space tourism, or exploration of new location like the moon or Mars. There as well, we see a commercial opportunity where communication will be required. So it's a very large space to address.
Thank you, Azrin. This was extremely insightful as well, and appreciate the distinction you make between space as a venture that can support existing markets, incumbent markets on Earth or in the skies, but also a new in-space market. And thank you for the assist. This is indeed like a great segue into the work of Mani at Orbit Fab. You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you. I think Yasmin, you did a wonderful job there, particularly detailing kind of the numbers and what's happening in terms of the different segments. I did want to make a note as well that the largest single segment for space is actually the ground segment. It's about $150 billion segment, which is kind of counterintuitive in many ways. but you know, a lot of attention gets, oh, space satellites, but there's a big infrastructure that goes along with that to enable those services. But yeah, absolutely. There's many ways you can slice and dice it. There's, you know, some folks who like to say there's the traditional space and new space. But for me, I think it's an interesting kind of opportunity in terms of the emergence of the likes of Starship, what that might do. So SpaceX's new launch vehicle that is capable of launching about 150 tons of payload. And the unknown kind of potential that has, where kind of like internet in the early days, what did that? No one really knew what kind of new avenues that might open up. So there's, you know, I'll kind of focus more on the emerging space aspect. You know, the LEO constellations are another element. Starlink, Kuiper, and others who are building out constellations of systems for SATCOM, but also there's also PNT, new low Earth orbit constellations for position, navigation, timing, and then increased lunar activities as well. You're seeing NASA's return to the moon, the Artemis program, but as well internationally, the International Lunar Research Station that China is leading on. The other aspects kind of to mention are the fact that space is increasingly becoming contested and congested with lots of new, you know, spacecraft going up. What does that mean? How do we better coordinate across not just individual entities within the nation, but also internationally? How do we ensure that we're coordinating in the best way so that a disaster doesn't happen in space in a given orbit, and that makes it an unusable orbit. So that's not something, you know, it's not in anyone's benefit to for that to happen. And then kind of on the satellite servicing aspect, which is where we focus, and I'll go into that in a bit later in the questions. That's another emerging segment where companies are emerging. A number of years ago, there were like a handful that were focused on satellite servicing. So that means life extension, you know, moving of assets into different orbits, and those kinds of repair and upgrade and those kinds of capabilities. There were a handful a few years ago. Now there's over 100 companies that are focused on this. So a really thriving, emerging area. And our focus is, you know, as a company, specifically on in-orbit refueling. To, you know, just like fuel drives every economy on Earth, we believe that's going to be the natural evolution in orbit, in orbit, but also on the lunar surface and beyond.
Thank you, Mani. It was interesting to hear like all these dynamics that are actually shaping the sector beyond a specific technology. And so when it comes to building like a space market, whether that is a commercial venture or a government national space agenda, that can become very complicated. No? So Dr. Saud, what strategies are you adopting to create and deliver value in the Sultanate of Oman for space?
Yeah, I think I will continue to where my colleague just started. I mean, at the time we were developing our national policy, we conducted a global market analysis and regional market analysis, and we identify where is the value. You know that, I mean, the investment in the space sector, if we take the upstream and the mid and the downstream, it's capital intensive. And with the scarce resources, we cannot be across the whole streams. Then we identify where is the large economic value, where Oman can have a position within this. Is it in the upstream? Is it in the midstream? Is it in the downstream? And then after a careful analysis of the global market, we identify that 90% of the economic value of the space sector is in the downstream segment. And I mean, we also learn from the experience of the telecom sector. I mean, if we today try to analyze the economic performance of the telecom sector, those operators who owns the infrastructures do not make the large money. The players in the telecom sector offer the top, like WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter. They don't invest in the infrastructures. They use the telecom sector, I mean the telecom infrastructures, but they don't invest in that capital intensive. So they just make use of it, We replicate that experience in the space sector. And then we decided not only giving the large economic value globally, which represent 90% of the market size, but also we don't have, at least in the first phase of developing the space sector, to invest largely in the upstream. Basically, I mean, in owning satellites, in owning all that requirements. We can lease whatever capacity we require, we can purchase whatever images for Earth observations, we can collaborate with many strategic partners, but maximize that value in the ground. And then that is the vision we put for the country, is to establish Oman as the regional gateway in the downstream services and applications. So for phase one of developing the space sectors, we are not investing as a government in the upstream. However, we identify what are the areas for the country that can focus, and we leave a door for any international investors who would like to come and establish their business in Oman. And if it requires to invest in the upstream, we will facilitate that, we will support that. But for the country itself, we will not do it at this stage. At this stage, we are maximizing the benefits of the ground segment, i.e., I mean, establishing the ground stations. We know that as we speak today, there are companies, global companies that provide ground station as a service, and they are looking around the globe where they can establish their ground stations. And I think strategically, we are positioned in a very good geographical locations along the equator with the clear skies that will, I mean, support the establishment of this business. I mean, data analytics for space-based data, okay? Receiving stations for TTCs for the global satellite operators. We are trying to make use of all of these, okay? However, there is an initiative going on in the country to invest in a geostationary satellite. That is required for, I mean, strategic purposes, not necessarily for economic purposes. It's for data sovereignty, for communication, I mean, security as well, okay? But moving forward for the sectors, the focus of the government is into downstream industry, which is fully aligned with my colleague Jasreen and Mani just, I mean, emphasized. So there we are going for the, as I said, for the first phase of this, of the policy.
So very clear. We appreciate the strategic intent of the things that you want to do and not do, and let others come in and do when they are not national priorities.
Not only that, I mean, we also, I mean, our philosophy of we identified various initiatives to realize our visions, and across the whole initiatives, we are identifying strategic partners. We don't want that, I mean, the philosophy of the country here is not to own the services. We don't want the government to compete with the private players. That private players being local private players or international investors. The role of the government is to facilitate it and to put the seed investment that will support it. Now the government's here trying to exit from being a service providers, from a service delivery position, okay? We are stepping up to a strategic level, being a policymaker, legislator, defining the strategic pathway for the futures, but not to compete with with private investors. Okay, so we identified various initiatives. We have already started, I mean, to be in touch with various global and regional players with whom we can develop that partnership to execute some of our, initiatives, including the conference that you attended. It was identified in the policy, and we executed that conference, by the way, in a partnership jointly with our colleagues from Euroconsult. That is not from nowadays, they changed their name. Okay, so all initiatives that we identified in our policies, as I said, will not be fully owned by the government, not be fully executed by the government, because the objective is not to compete, but to allow and to support and to facilitate the growth of the private industry. That is the new space economy, the essence of the new space economy, in which the private players stepping in. And we would like to start it correctly. Since we are just starting by 2021 and we are now in 2024, we don't want to start the government owning and providing, and later on we will think about our exit strategy. we start with an exit strategy in place already. Sorry, I took longer than I should.
No problem at all. I think that the concept of a government as an enabler of the private sector, adopting asset-light strategy is something we hear more and more, and in the context of this emerging economy. But now let's look into the private sector with Yasreen, and what type of strategies Viasat adopting to create and deliver value.
So actually what has just been said makes perfect sense, because we also see a lot of governments across the world trying to leverage on the commercial sector to respond to national needs, like critical national infrastructure. Space is considered now as a critical national infrastructure, for example, in the UK. And also NASA, for example, are doing the same. They're moving away from fully funding their own system to leveraging on the commercial sector more and more, and as a company, Viasat is going along that journey, because the assets we have in space are multi-purposes. So the same satellite that we have in orbit, we have 30 or so geostationary satellites in orbit today. They are serving several needs, whether it's governments, institutions, or the private and more commercial sector, with exactly the same technology, and everybody benefits from the yield and the low cost by using the kind of the volumes approach. So as a company, our strategy evolves over time. I mean, we have to respond to the evolution of the market demand, just like governments are changing their strategies. We have to adapt. We having to adapt to a very, very competitive environment today. I mean, the competition at the moment is out of this world, literally. It's a space race that is very tough. We're dealing with billionaires that have unlimited resources, unlimited access to capital, and yet we have to even if the rules of the game are not the same for everyone, we still have to remain competitive and challenge ourselves. So I would imagine on the call we have a lot of MBA students from Oxford, and so the trades we're going through are the typical strategy trade you would imagine. Are we vertically integrated in order to lower our cost? But what does that mean? If we're vertically integrated, that means we need to maintain that capability above and beyond our short-term needs, and that means you need to have certainty on where you're going forward. We're having to go through a lot of buy versus make versus acquire questions, and where the intellectual property or your differentiator is, and therefore having a very honest view of whether we are sufficiently competitive, where we are behind, where we are ahead, and how we leverage on our capabilities and assets in space and resources as a business. So then you end up going back to your core value as a business. Those things don't change, but even though your strategy may, and our core values are around innovation, that's very strong into the DNA of the company, and it's about providing the best connectivity solution to our customers in the air, at sea, in land, and beyond, with space now as a market. So you go back to that and you assess how do you adapt your distribution, how you adapt to your ecosystem. And one of perhaps the very interesting shift that is happening in our telecoms world at the moment, particularly for space, is the 5G revolution. What's happening now is that very recently the 5G standard has become non-terrestrial network compatible, which means now any phone you may have in the future and already now can do not only terrestrial connectivity, but can also connect to space. And that's a massive shift. That means all of us as consumer will be able to be really connected everywhere on Earth. And so what does that mean for us as a satellite operator? The value chain changes. Now the people we're dealing the most with are the chip makers. Those chip makers that are building billions of devices of chips per year are now becoming part of our new ecosystem. Mobile network operators are owning the end user and the subscribers. So they will become perhaps our distribution channel, which is very new for us as a satellite operator. So we're having to really shift this whole paradigm and then use it as an opportunity to adopt the standard, to be interoperable, to be open, to realize that perhaps this will mean space will become a little bit more standardized. And what does that mean? Where do we put the positioning of the company to still create value? And which market do we want to address? Do we still stick to aviation, maritime, etc., or suddenly are we opening up a new market with automotive and or broadcasting, alert messaging, emergency services? Those are things that, yes, are close to the DNA of the company, but so far we're mostly aviation and maritime. So how we're shifting that to a new ecosystem. So this is like, it's a growing and evolving strategy, and we're having to adapt. And I think the 5G revolution, as one example, is going to shift not only Viasat strategy, but I think the entire SATCOM ecosystem, and may lead to, in the future, even more consolidation of the industry, or getting the terrestrial and the space world becoming one single sector. And we may get to a point where nobody will know anymore whether it's a space industry or the terrestrial industry. It will be completely hidden behind the end user, and wherever they are connected.
And if I can play back what I heard so far, thank you, Yasreen and Dr. Saud so far. When we hear that space is actually a market or an economy, this somehow, let's say, underplays the role that agents, whether they are government or commercial agents, have actually in shaping this sector. A new technology emerges, entrepreneurs and governments think about using those technology, eventually wrap them around a business model, and move towards some form of market standards and consensus. And talking about standards and interoperability, I think, Mani, the parallel with what you're doing at Orbit Fab is quite relevant. So over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I'll try and keep my answers brief, because I've got to jump in a taxi in like 8 minutes. But yeah, so, fundamentally, to give you some background, we're founded to solve the space mobility problem, which is really fundamental to enable that thriving ecosystem in orbit. And I mentioned fuel, drives every economy on Earth, and we believe that will be the case in space, particularly when you look at any given spacecraft mass. It's typically about 40% is fuel. So it's quite tragic that we discard satellites because they ran out of fuel. And the company's origin related to customer feedback. We went around asking operators, how much does a kilogram of fuel, how much do you value a kilogram of fuel? And satellites that are approaching the end of their life, they're still perfectly revenue generating. So a good value there, and the answers we kept getting consistently was about $1 million. And so we went back and did the maths on our side, and you can get to orbit for a given kilogram between $1,000 and $10,000. Depends. You can do some nice deals per kilogram. So that gave us an opportunity for up to three orders of magnitude arbitrage opportunity in terms of the value creation potential that's here. So that led to the founder kind of saying, well, we've got to stop everything. This is clearly an important area. We've got to focus on this. And ended up raising funds from a number of investors, including our Series A last year. We raised over 30 million. Including from Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Munich Re. In fact, we were the only company to have raised investment from both Lockheed and Northrop. They don't, so they see the value that we're trying to create. But to your point about standards, one of the key enablers is in order to have refueling, it's hard to refuel satellites that are unprepared. So you need some crazy robotics. You need to open the fill drain valves and like slice through the layers, and it's like satellite surgery. So very expensive. NASA had a mission called OSAM-1, which was costing about $2 billion. They ended up canceling that whole mission because the costs were escalating. So we really believe you have to have spacecraft that are prepared for fueling. So our approach has been to develop the interfaces that enable that. So on the client side, we've made an interface called Rafty that is all about minimizing the cost and complexity for adoption. So it costs the same as the existing full drain valves, and you can fuel on the ground. So you have all the utility that you need from existing valves, but now you can also refuel in space. And we got we've got feedback from hundreds of partners, customers, and suppliers into designing that interface. And now that's being delivered to customers already this year. We've got US government, UK company, and Japanese company as well. So, you know, our motto in terms of our strategy and how we approach is really to fly early, fly often. And we've already demonstrated key pieces of the technology. We've flown to the ISS. We became the first company private company to resupply the ISS. We did some tests on board and really took a lot of lessons from that. And then we flew another mission, and that was a free flyer. So we're trying to de-risk all of the key pieces and towards end-to-end refueling that's going to occur towards the end of next year. So that's our general kind of approach.
Thank you, Mani. And I'll just ask our audience as well to keep posting questions for our speakers on the chat. And Mani, before you head out to fly to the valley, I'll address the first question to you. Like, what forms of working together do you see emerging between public and private sector, platforms, ecosystems, collaborations with incumbents and startups?
Yeah, that's I think for us it's really, really important. We're a key we see building the ecosystem as a key part of the puzzle, right? In order for our technology to be embedded, we need to be in as part of the supply chain. So that means talking to satellite manufacturers, talking to propulsion providers, so we can support the different types of propulsion systems that are out there and enable refueling across a wide portfolio of propellant types and propulsion systems. And then the bus manufacturers to ensure that our interface can be incorporated onto them. And then satellite operators like Yasrin's to make sure that they are considering refueling into their future operations and how they might enable their business case and value generation, particularly as there's increased consolidation. Does that mean do you need less spacecraft over certain regions? Does that mean you can prioritize and move those assets around? And having refueling capability means you have the flexibility to move around as and when you need to. So that's the kind of broad sense of how we are working with the ecosystem. We also see partners in the sense of government as a key partner to enable de-risking of R&D and technology. So we've been fortunate to have received over 30 million in contracts and revenue from government and private enterprise. But yeah, government has been a key supporter for us thus far, and we see them continuing to do so across the US and the UK. We have our UK office as well. So really for us, in terms of the criteria of success in the next couple of years, is to see the fruition of that operational architecture. So doing end-to-end refueling. And then more broadly, I think the sector, I'm talking beyond refueling, beyond satellite servicing, the sector itself brings immense value to activity on the Earth, right? How do we maximize the utilization of that enormous data that's being collected by those sensors in orbit to address global challenges, right? I think that's a tremendous opportunity, and that's probably where I will leave my final response to. So yeah, thank you. I'll still be on the phone, but I'll be off camera.
Thank you, Mani. Wish you safe travels, and we stay connected. So indeed, it's interesting perspective from Orbit Hub around the different forms of collaboration that are emerging and the perspectives of a scale up. Dr. Saud, can you give us your perspective from a government vantage point about these collaborations? You hinted us a bit earlier on what you're doing and how you are finding out partnerships. Can you develop a bit further on that and also on the timeframes for success?
Yes, yes, Michael, as I said earlier, the philosophy of executions here in Oman is that the government doesn't intend to own projects or to deliver the service. And from there, after we identified something like 11 initiatives, we started already, navigating the market. Who of the strategic partners can support us in executing any of those projects? So we feel that private investors, private players are key to the success of the sector for many reasons. Because those private players, they own the technology. We don't own the technology, okay? They have enough experience. They are in a better position to provide the service. All what we need as a government is to enable them, to facilitate how they enter the market and to remove the market barriers. That is all what we are doing. I give you one example. Let's talk about the conference itself. It was, pure partnerships. We found, sponsored for 60% of the total cost. This is one. Second initiatives, we call it space cloud, space data and cloud partnerships. That is one of the projects we identify in the policy as an essential for the downstream industry, in which we provide space-based data and the data analytics to it. We make the linkage between an international player and a local investors. We facilitate that investment, and the project is taking place. Okay. There are also some initiatives that I don't want to disclose now. Of course, we are doing it with the private investors, and that private investors, as I said, not necessarily Romani, local. Okay. We bring local with internationals, because the ultimate objectives also of these initiatives is to localize, to make technology transfers, the know-how to be transferred. So we don't want to deal only with the global players. We don't want look to these initiatives as an off-the-shelf product. We are not dealing with a vendor who will supply us with that product only, but we are looking for strategic partners who will support the development of the sector in Oman. By linking them with the local players, we make knowledge transfer, know-how, capacity buildings. So these are some of the initiatives that we took place. At the local level, for examples, we are also doing great initiatives in capacity building and public awareness. Because as I said in the first, at the beginning, the sector as a standalone sector is new. We just launched the policy by 2023. So we need to make a public awareness about the importance, how this will play. And that public awareness does not only targeting the decision makers. We start even from the school level. We would like to bring the students aware of the space, how space can help them, how space can improve the life for them. And we develop, we call it a space technology and applications corner, targeted the school kids. Okay, that is, it costs something like $500,000 US. It's fully funded by private investors. It's fully funded. And it will be operated partially by the government, but also by a private player. Okay, so we in the ministry, we did not inject any single real. So we make that partnerships. All what we do is just to develop a sound business case, what will achieve at a national level, what it will achieve also for the investors or for the fund, giver to the government, and then we move ahead. It doesn't mean we don't have enough cash for that, we have it. But again, I don't want to be in my department ending up providing the service. I don't want to be in my department ending up operating that space corner. I am not a teacher. I am not an academic institutions. We are at strategic level. We are defining how the sector should move ahead. Who are of the strategic partners we would like to bring? How can I facilitate global, regional, and local linkages? How can I facilitate the interaction among the local players, being academic, industry, and the government? How the space applications and services can help the use cases of different sectors. That is also my role, which comes under capacity building and awareness. I aware the decision makers, for example, in fisheries, what sort of technologies that can help them. Even sometimes, not only once, many times, a lot of global service providers, they come in touch with me. I immediately link them with the right clients in the country. That is also my role. Okay, because it will give options for the government clients or for private clients where they can get that service, and then they will be in a better position to decide with whom they shall partner. Because some of them, we have some global partners who dominate the local market or the regional market. We would like to make the market open for money. Okay, because that will enhance the quality. The competition will drive the quality. Also, the competition between the service player will help us in developing our local capability. So that is how I see the partnership between public and private could take place. And as I said, the main principle, the main philosophy is not to be a service provider, the government not to be a service provider. That is not the line we would like to cross, unless the service is necessary and we find it difficult to find a private service provider. That's it.
Terrific answer. In your words, I read like the orchestrator of an ecosystem, no? Brokering relations, coordinating, taking, deciding when to step in and when let the market do the job. Very interesting.
I mean, as I said, we have strategic view. We know where we enter, where we don't do. We don't want to think about exit later on. Whenever we start, we should have an exit strategy beforehand. So we know we are doing this until that level, and then from that line, we shouldn't cross. Or we just facilitate it, just the few steps, initial steps, and then the later we facilitate and we look after how things is going on. Because, you know that the strength of the government, it's more reliable, it's more trustworthy for the international player. So when they come through the national space program, they feel it more credible. Of course, private players in Oman deal directly with private players from the global market. That is totally up to them. We do not stop that interaction. It is an open market. But when it comes through the space program, that is our philosophy. We don't want to be a service provider, as simple as that.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying the pathway of the Sultanate of Oman. Yasreen, over to you as an incumbent. How do you see collaboration with other agencies, startups?
It's super important. And before I dive into it, I really see the governments and the public sector as an orchestrator, exactly as you said. If you look at Oxford, for example, yes, you have centuries of intellectual property creation through universities, but then you also have commercial entities around, and you have the Harwell cluster where they brought in the European Space Agency, the Satellite Catapult, the UK Space Agency, Thales, Oxford Space System, etc. So you can see, and that's how you create the most value, is when not only you have the public sector and governments kind of giving you the infrastructure for something to flourish, but also building all from the startup to the large companies, having opportunity to cross path and exchange and create value. So that's one very important. But perhaps to go back to your point on how we interact with governments and institutions, they're a massive enabler, particularly for my role as the head of kind of disruptive innovation within Viasat. Many initiatives we're creating are heavily backed by UK Space Agency, European Space Agency, the Japanese Space Agency, or NASA, and this is only going to continue because those entities are now trying to enable the commercial sector as opposed to be the customer. And but they have a key role as well as the anchor customer, the risk taker. They give market opportunity, and then we can leverage on those assets to then build up a more commercial initiative. So they are also a huge enabler, and particularly when we're exploring new markets. And also, I think the public sector has a crucial role when it comes to policy making and regulations. If I use the example of the LEO orbit market, or even what's happening on the moon, it's a bit of a first come, first serve. Everybody understood what location means, and so there is no regulation at the moment. There is no framework that is really setting the rules of how we need to collaborate. And so I think each nation needs, and each space agency needs to set up those rules, but there also needs to be overarching framework around that. And that's, again, how the public sector can do it. And sometimes to enable those things, it's through special projects, public-private partnerships, and so yeah, here again, public sector, massive enabler in this, and perhaps they also are an enabler in STEM and education aspect as well. Like we as corporations, we value having the right talents in the right location, so we can leverage on that. But in isolation, it's quite hard. So that's again where the public sector brings massive value by consulting industry on the expertise that is missing, and so they can create that next generation of talents that we can then leverage on to make the nation and the world in general way more ahead of the game, and avoid the issues where we have biases and things like that in the way we develop our AI or ML algorithms and things like that. This is where again where government has a huge value, and that's how we interact with them.
Well, I'll try to bring some things together, and then we have some minutes for the question, because this Yasreen has been extremely helpful. What I heard so far is that the pathways to space of commercial organizations, of governments, are rich of opportunities. They are rich of opportunities for socioeconomic growth, for commercial actors, and also to build new markets. But they're also rich of complexity. The supply chains are extremely complicated for doing things in space. Regulatory voids reduce the appetite for some commercial operators to enter. Talent needs to be built and nurtured. And this also brings like closer to that idea that, well, there is not really a distinction between old space, government funded, and new space, privately funded. Actually, the two things really go together, and I think we've heard it through our distinguished speakers. We have a couple of questions in the chat. One is for Yasreen. What is your relationship with Starlink, and do you think it will be your competition in the next 10 years? Are you preparing for it? And if so, how?
Yes, very good question. So Starlink, for those who don't know, are building, have launched a very large mega constellation of low Earth orbit satellites, which are basically closer to Earth and present some advantages in terms of performance, and they're more and more addressing the residential market, providing internet to home, but then also adjacent markets. And they're not the only one. There is also Amazon Kuiper, Project Kuiper, which is also about to do a similar mega constellation. You may know about Eutelsat and OneWeb also having a similar constellation. So it is obviously definitely on Viasat agenda to explore how we are addressing it. And I think the angle we're looking at, and without revealing our grand plans, is to take perhaps a more collaborative approach by saying, hang on a second, those are just infrastructures in space, and the value is around how you deliver those services to the customer and the whole ecosystem. So how about we join forces, we make an open standard constellation, we work with other players that are also willing to enter this market and follow that more open infrastructure approach, as opposed to duplicating capacity. And the other element we're looking at it is, we're not looking at it as a LEO constellation in isolation. We're looking at it as an augmentation of our existing capability. So the challenge of geostationary versus low Earth orbit is, with one single geostationary satellite, you see 1/3 of the Earth. With 3 satellites, you have covered the Earth and you have your asset in space for 20 years. The low Earth orbit satellite requires way more assets because you're much closer to Earth, and there are cost benefits for each. And I think we will explore more and more how to leverage on our existing presence for the market we're present in, but also explore how we augment our capability, joining forces with others, with an open framework, with also a mindset where sustainability is at the heart of what we're doing, and taking those considerations as well. To be responsible, a responsible enterprise by responding to the competitive landscape, but also the expectation of the customers we're targeting.
Very, very insightful again. Collaborations versus competition in a complex environment, and keys for success. I'd like to address one question to Dr. Saud as well. It's not explicitly here, but I think many of our guests here are keen to engage with the Oman and its space strategy and stakeholders. Well, how can they do that? How can they engage with you? And what are your what is your call for space companies and entrepreneurs, and how they can engage with your strategies?
Okay. I mean, our strategy is publicly available online. They can just Google it. It's Oman National Space Policy and Executive Program. It's available in the website of the Ministry of Transport and ICT. From there, they can identify what are the initiatives that currently we are working on. And then we will receive proposals from any players, partners who would like to participate in any of those investments. And we highly welcome, especially those who would like to establish a local presence for their business. We would like, to see those people whom, I don't want to use the word seriousness, but they're really looking for partnerships rather than just grabbing business opportunities. We are not just looking for business traders or brokers who would like to provide services. That is not what we intend at the space program. However, the local service users, they can deal directly with the service providers, and they deal with the service as a business, commodity. For the space program, we look for partnerships who help developing the sector. So there are some initiatives we would like, and we have received some good proposals from some of our partners. They're mapping their capability with the initiatives, and they draw a clear roadmap how we can partner together. What is the expectation from our side? What they are offering, what they expect from our side. That is how they can engage. I can put on the chat the email of the space program, in which they can, any general inquiry they can send to the space program. And we take it further from there. We take it forward from there. I would like to add one point regarding, you touched base on the regulation of the sector. And the regulations is one of the key factors, especially for investment. And here, because the sector is new and it overlaps with other sectors, telecom, aviation sectors, and this is a space sector. So the regulations is between all of these together. We are adapting a very loose regulations. We do not have yet a law. And the regulations with us grow with the growth of the sector. Okay. And we are learning also from international experiences. We did not opt to start with a space law, because once we have law, the law will tell do or don't do. And we don't have a mature sector. So we didn't want to stop the opportunities. We did not want to, to make it rigid and difficult for the entrants to start this sector. No, we just try to highlight what is not possible, which basically means the rest is possible. So we just try to exclude what you can do, but the rest, basically, you can do it. And this is one of the attractives, one of the uniqueness of our sector here. As I said, we did not start with a law that stop the entrance or decide crystal clear what you can do or what you cannot. We have very flexible regulations, and it's adaptive regulations. We try to see what we need, how can we adapt it. Of course, the things that we did at the beginning is that as a country, we signed all international agreements and treaties for the United Nations, which gives a comfort for any international players that Oman is committed to the international rights to the investors in the space sector. Apart from that, we did not want to start with legislations that stop any entrance.
And this is a great closure for the session as we reach the top of the hour, using governance and regulations to actively shape the market without inhibiting the activity of entrepreneurs, but while being in line with the international expectations. So as I said, we've reached the top of the hour. Let me thank once again our distinguished speakers, Yasreen Ibn Yahya, Dr. Saud, and Manishar. And the recording will be available online shortly. Please get in touch for any further questions, and then we wish you to join the next episodes of the Pathways to Space and Smart Space Speaker Series. Thank you again, and see you all soon.
I put in the comments side my personal email and also the space program email. Anyone who would like to be in touch with us, please do.
And we will share them with the audience. Thank you, Dr. Thode.
It's our pleasure. Thank you very much, Michael, for this opportunity.
Most welcome.
It's been a great pleasure for me to speak about Oman National Space Program and how we are developing the space sector. I'm honored to be with Yasreen and our colleagues who just left, Manny, and all the team from Said Business School at Oxford. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you
very
much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.